how do you think that's really evolved since like when you started your lab and what your vision was?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, people always ask about vision. I think my vision has always been to follow my nose, but so it's not a huge vision based operation. That said, I think, 1999, 21 years ago almost when the lab started, it was a traditional catalysis group, but we always had this physical organic focus as the kind of foundation. From doing traditional kinetics and linear free energy relationships to doing even some computation back in the old days. We would do whatever was necessary to get at the root of the fundamental issue. And that hasn't changed at all, actually. It's still kind of how the the foundation parts of the group works. But as you know, over the last decade, we've taken really intense steps towards streamlining the optimization process of a catalytic reaction, and as a consequence, we've stumbled into really traditional physical organic chemistry. It stems back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. The multivariate linear regression tools were established in the 1960s in physical organic chemistry. So we've gone back and really perused that literature in detail and taken from it the key lessons, and now with greater computational power and also a little more sophisticated ways to describe molecules, we can really chase after a number of interesting dreams of what my group would want to do, which is to streamline the optimization, but simultaneously understand why certain things happen, and they do, both the good and the bad.
So for you, as far as like computer-assisted synthesis or machine learning, it's really just another tool to help get at why? Or? Yeah,
for us, I mean, because we've been doing this for quite some time now, almost 12 years, which surprises me all the time. It's always been how can you make your work in the laboratory easier? And I don't really care what that looks like. It could be a great NMR technique. It could be using data science tools, which is the way I always describe all of this stuff. It could be just a really good intuitive idea. It doesn't have to. It's whatever is required to solve the problem. And with that said, obviously we're investing a lot of effort into how do you featureize molecules. That would probably be the calling card of the group right now. And then how do you take those features and make sense of reaction development, and how would we help people like you who are dealing with a reaction problem, and how would we help the community not spend a lot of wasted effort? And ultimately what I care about is actually why do certain reactions or molecules do what they do. It's always been what drives me from when I was a graduate student and still today.
How would you address the sentiment that computers are coming for our jobs, or like the fear from someone?
I get asked this by everybody. I am dancing a little bit. I don't think I think the chemist's role has constantly changed, and this is you can see this trajectory in the business, which is chemists used to be people who just made things. And then we were people who made things with purpose. And now we're people who have to make things with purpose, and we have to do it in a timeline that is short. And to me, once you want to do this, make the thing you want to make, let's say a antiviral, rapidly without having to go through a long-term campaign to optimize a particular step or even the structure itself. And so why not use whatever tool you have available to you? It doesn't mean that computers are going to take our jobs. I think that's a misnomer. Computers will facilitate us doing better jobs. And automated synthesis and synthesis planning software, these are all things that are a consequence of us, but then we can go chase different problems. Chemists are certainly, we're kind of a combination of artist and construction worker. And I think we want to be more on the art side than the construction side, at least I would.
So what, kind of in this context, what significant changes kind of to the field of organic chemistry do you anticipate over the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, once the overhype of machine learning goes away, and people showcase, how many mistakes one can make when you do it wrong, I do think computers are and this is not a surprise because it's been around for a while, computers are actually going to be pretty important. Computation is important. I mean, we're dealing with a global pandemic, and I'm working from home, and so is 24 people in my research group, and guess what 20 of them are doing? They're doing computational work, because it turns out you can do that from anywhere. So I think that is going to be much more widely used, no doubt. I think the big changes that come from that, though, are more interesting. And, you know, the question is, what do you want to do becomes more accessible than how you do it. So once you have tools that streamline some aspects of the synthetic route, let's say, you can focus much more on the aggressive disconnects. You can focus, because you're not spending 6 months or a year building the piece that you need to test the concept, right? The concept that is unknown. Because most of it is just, you know, it's routine on paper and a pain in the lab. So how do we streamline that part first? Seems like the reasonable place to look. And then work really hard to get your place where you can think about new disconnection strategies, new synthetic methods that are late stage, and, you know, ultimately compounds that do stuff, so you can simultaneously think about these things at once. That's, I mean, again, I'm not a vision kind of person. That's just really not my thing. I think the vision I have is physical organic chemistry turns out to be really important. And if you understand why things happen, you have a great chance of solving a hard problem, and whatever that problem may be. So I guess what I would hope is that you know, this kind of computational side of things is the reemergence of kind of traditional physical organic chemistry in a 2020 version. And that's, you know, that's what I would spout if I was allowed to be on a soapbox. The secret sauce, and I was just telling this in my last call this morning, the secret sauce is not the mathematics, not the kind of traditional computational chemistry. It's actually the chemistry. And so how do you featureize molecules? What features should you be looking for? How do you develop new features for particular problems? And you've seen this a little bit in the C-CAS meetings. That's what my group does a lot of. And that requires chemists, you know, and then the chemist has to be able to code it, and the chemist has to be able to interpret it. And those are new skills, I would say. But, you know, a steric effect is still a steric effect, but how do you describe it mathematically, and what kinds of steric effects do you want?
Speaking of these first-year graduate students coming in, if you're thinking back to yourself, what would you tell yourself as a first-year graduate student as advice for your future? Or what would you tell other first-year graduate
Are we talking 1992 me or 2020 me?
Well, no. As you know, 2020 you. What do you think you as a 1990 as a first-year graduate student would need to hear, or what do you think first-year graduate students need?
I think nothing's changed, to be quite honest. I think the piece of advice I try to give people leaving my group as undergraduates and when they join my group as first years is the same thing, and that is, don't be afraid of new things, and choose, if the solution to your problem requires getting out of your comfort zone, go. And I will say that as a first-year graduate student, and even today, scientifically, that's one of the things that I've never been afraid of failure outside of what I don't know. I would say that's the one kind of, and I'm sure my mentors would agree with this completely. That's not I'm a conservative person in a lot of ways, but not when it comes to science, and being afraid of getting outside of my comfort zone. So that's the piece of advice. Do not be afraid to get outside your comfort zone, especially if you think some tool is going to help you solve a problem. So let's say it's EPR. You've never done it, and you're like, oh, that's so frightening. It looks hard. It doesn't matter if it's hard or easy. If it's required to solve your problem, you should figure out how to do it and how to interpret it. And I've had people do that. And then they translate that to me as a PI. So it's the best job in the world. So I have these people that go out and figure out how to solve this problem, and they bring it back to me, and they have to then tell me. We did cell biology projects in around 2009 to 2015. I had one graduate student and a couple of coworkers work on this, and I did my sabbatical in that. And I didn't know what flow cytometry was and how to read out flow cytometry. I didn't know how to do a bunch of these experiments. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. All I had to do is learn some new experiments and learn how to read out the outputs. It's just experiments in the end. And so knowing how to set it up and know how to interpret the data, it's no different whether you're a biologist, a physicist, a chemist. And so why should you be just someone who wants to look at NMRs or look at HPLC outputs? I mean, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. You set it up right, you run the experiment, and then you have to figure out how to analyze it. And I think machine learning, or whatever people are calling it these days, it's no different. It's the in-between step.